Sunday morning should have smelled like coffee and calm, but it smelled like betrayal. Helen Parker stood barefoot on the driveway of her Portland home, staring at her son-in-law Derek Grant as he handed her a stack of papers. "It's done," he said. "The house is sold. You need to vacate by Wednesday." For a moment, she thought she had misheard. The breeze carried the scent of wet pine from the front yard she'd tended for 40 years. "Sold," she whispered. "Derek, this is my home." Melissa appeared behind him, her tone too smooth. "Mom, we discussed this. The market's high. Derek found a buyer who's paying double what it was worth. It's smart for everyone." "Everyone?" Helen asked softly. "Did I sign something?" Derek smiled, patient but patronizing. "Remember the power of attorney form when you had surgery. It gave me temporary control of your assets. The sale just moved quicker than expected." Melissa stepped forward. "Mom, this is a good thing. We'll help you find a condo near downtown. No more yard work or repairs." Helen's pulse pounded. Behind her, the white-shuttered house where Richard had planted roses and where she'd read to Melissa on the porch swing felt like it was slipping away. "You sold my home without asking me." "Technically, it was part of Dad's estate," Melissa said. "You just lived here. Derek handled it so we wouldn't lose value. It's for your own good." Those words cut through her like glass. "For your own good." "You had no right," she said. Derek sighed. "Helen, you're almost 70. Managing property is stressful. You'll thank us later." He handed her an envelope. "Here's a cashier's check, enough for a deposit at a senior community. The amount was barely a fraction of what the house was worth." Melissa tried for sympathy. "Mom, you always said Dad wanted us to build something together. We're just continuing what he started." Helen looked at her daughter's polished face and saw not guilt, but calculation. "Get off my property," she whispered. Derek's tone hardened. "It's not yours anymore." The words detonated in her chest. That night, she moved like a ghost through the rooms. The family photos still hung in the hallway, the fishing trip at Crater Lake, Melissa's graduation, Richard's smile. She sat at the dining table, staring at the space where birthdays had been celebrated, and opened a small box she'd kept for decades. Inside were Richard's wedding ring, his watch, and a note in his looping hand. "If anything ever feels wrong, call Charles Rivers." Charles, Richard's old friend and attorney, had handled every legal matter after the funeral. He had never mentioned selling the house. Helen's thoughts sharpened. Something was terribly off. Outside, the rain thickened. She poured cold tea and studied the papers Derek had given her. The signature looked almost right, but not quite the H too narrow, the curve unnatural. Derek had always been good with documents, clever enough to forge what he couldn't earn. 40 years of work, every mortgage payment, every sacrifice stolen with a line of ink. Her phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Derek's trying to help. Stay at the Maple Lodge Motel until we figure things out. Love you." Helen typed a reply, then deleted it. She turned the phone face down and stared at the papers again. A faint imprint marked the corner as if another page had been signed beneath it. Maybe a copy of Richard's will, maybe the truth. The anger faded into something colder, steadier. They thought she was weak, a retired teacher with a soft heart and fading eyesight. But she'd spent 4 decades reading essays, catching every lie buried between the lines. At midnight, thunder rolled across Portland's skyline. Helen stood by the window, watching the rain hit the porch steps. Somewhere inside that storm, a decision took shape. She would leave quietly. She would not beg. She would not fight on their terms. By morning, she would pack 2 suitcases, the same ones she and Richard had taken on their honeymoon. She would drive away from the house they had built and the daughter who had just sold it from under her feet. But she would not be broken. Because what Melissa and Derek did not know was that Richard Parker had left more than memories behind. He had left instructions, hidden accounts, a secret known only to one man still alive. And before the week was over, Helen Parker was going to find him. By morning, Portland was wrapped in gray mist. Helen Parker loaded 2 suitcases into her old Toyota without once looking back at the White House behind her. She knew if she did, she wouldn't be able to leave. The Maple Lodge Motel sat beside the highway, its neon sign flickering weakly in the drizzle. Her room smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. A faded painting of Mount Hood hung crooked over the bed. Helen sat on the edge of the mattress, hands trembling. Yesterday she had a home, a garden, a future. Now she had a plastic room key and an envelope full of betrayal. She unpacked only what mattered: her husband's watch and nightgown, and the note he had written before his death. If anything ever feels wrong, call Charles Rivers. Charles Richard's lawyer and best friend had handled every legal matter after the funeral. He had never mentioned selling the house. Something didn't add up. She called his office. "Mr. Rivers is in court," said the young receptionist. "Can I take a message?" "Please tell him Helen Parker called," she said softly. "It's urgent." When she hung up, the silence pressed around her. Melissa's voice echoed in her mind. "It's for your own good." Helen pressed her palms to her eyes. Her daughter had always been strong-willed, but this, it wasn't help, it was theft. A knock startled her. A woman stood at the door holding a tray of coffee and muffins. She wore a motel uniform, dark hair streaked with gray. "Morning," she said. "I'm Rosa. You just checked in, right? Figured you could use breakfast." "That's kind of you," Helen said, surprised. "Not really," Rosa replied. "You looked like someone who hadn't eaten since yesterday." She set the tray down on the dresser and gave Helen a curious look. "Rough week. My daughter sold my house without asking me," Helen said quietly. Rosa blinked. "That's cold. She said it was for my own good." Rosa shook her head. "People say that right before they hurt you." Helen managed a weak smile. "I thought I raised her better." "Sometimes love makes us blind," Rosa said. "Eat something. You'll think clearer after." After Rosa left, Helen sipped the bitter coffee, her thoughts circling back to the forged documents Derek had shown her. The more she studied them, the more wrong they looked. The signature wasn't hers. The loop in the H too tight, the slant too sharp. Derek had always been smooth with paperwork too smooth. Her phone rang that afternoon. Helen said a familiar voice. "It's Charles Rivers." His tone carried disbelief. "I've been trying to reach you for months. Melissa told me you were traveling." Helen's pulse quickened. "Traveling, Charles. They sold my house. That's impossible. Richard's will left everything to you. The house, the investments, everything. Melissa's inheritance was conditional." Conditional, yes. Richard wanted her to inherit only if she treated you with respect after his death. He was worried about her attitude. Helen's throat tightened. "Then she lied to me." "I'm afraid so. Bring every document Derek gave you. I'll reopen the estate file tomorrow." That night, Helen sat on the narrow bed, her mind racing. She had thought the betrayal was emotional. Now she saw it was criminal. They hadn't just stolen her home, they'd tried to erase her. The next morning, she dressed in the navy skirt and cream sweater she used to wear for parent-teacher meetings. It made her feel steady. At Charles's downtown office, he listened carefully as she explained everything. Then he examined the papers. "The signature's off," he said immediately. "And this notary seal completely fake. Derek's in serious trouble." Helen gripped the edge of her chair. "So I wasn't imagining it." "No," he said. "We'll contact the district attorney and freeze the sale. But you must keep quiet. Let them think you're defeated. It's easier to catch thieves who believe their victim is powerless." Leaving his office, Helen felt lighter. For the first time in days, her fear had direction. She drove back to the motel with steady hands. That evening, Rosa knocked again. "You look different," she said, setting down 2 cups of tea. "Like someone who made a decision." "I did," Helen replied. "I'm not done fighting." Rosa smiled. "Good. Some people only learn through consequences." Outside rain began again, soft but steady. The neon sign flickered between Maple and Motel, half its bulbs dead. Helen stared at her reflection in the window. A woman changed. They had taken her house, her comfort, and almost her dignity, but they hadn't taken her resolve. She whispered to the glass, "You think I'm weak, Derek. You're about to find out how wrong you are." The next morning, Helen woke to the low rumble of traffic outside the motel. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and rain-soaked asphalt. She lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what it felt like to wake up without dread pressing against her chest. Rosa knocked around 8, holding 2 steaming cups. "You've got that look again," she said. "The one people get before doing something big or stupid." Helen managed a tired smile. "Maybe both." She took the coffee. "I'm meeting Charles later. He's filing paperwork to freeze the house sale." Rosa whistled softly. "Good. Let them choke on their own greed." Helen appreciated Rosa's bluntness. It grounded her. For decades, she had been surrounded by polite smiles and carefully chosen words. Rosa spoke like someone who had lived enough to stop pretending. After breakfast, Helen sat by the window, watching mist drift over the wet parking lot. Across the street, a man in a gray hoodie swept puddles away from a diner's doorway. Ordinary life went on, oblivious to hers collapsing. She felt invisible. By noon, Charles called. "The petition is filed," he said. "Until the court verifies the documents, no one can finalize that sale. Derek will find out soon." Then what Helen asked. "Then we let him panic. People who think they've won make mistakes when their luck changes." Later that afternoon, Helen walked to the diner for lunch. She hadn't been there in years, not since Richard was alive. The waitress seated her near the window, and Helen ordered soup and bread comfort food for an unsettled heart. Halfway through her meal, she noticed a familiar car park across the street, a silver BMW. Derek's. Her stomach turned cold. He stepped out phone pressed to his ear eyes, scanning the street before he disappeared into a building labeled Portland Property Exchange. Helen stared through the glass, her mind racing. That office specialized in title transfers. If he was there, he was moving money or hiding it. Back at the motel, she called Charles again. "He's trying to cover his tracks," she said. "I saw him at a real estate office." Charles's voice stayed calm. "Good. Let him work harder to bury himself. I've already contacted a detective who handles financial fraud. Her name's Naomi Torres. Expect her call tonight." At dusk, Helen walked to the vending machine outside, the air damp and heavy. She could smell the river even from here, metallic and distant. Rosa appeared carrying a laundry basket. "You all right, sweetheart? You look like you saw a ghost." "Just my son-in-law," Helen said quietly. "He's still scheming." Rosa's brows lifted. "Then you keep scheming louder." When night fell, Naomi Torres called. Her voice was firm but reassuring. "Mrs. Parker, Mr. Rivers briefed me. I need every detail, what you signed, what they said, any documents you still have." Helen described everything from Derek's smug tone to the fake check. Naomi listened without interruption. "You've got more evidence than most victims," she said finally. "Between the forged documents and the conditional clause in your husband's will, they've committed multiple felonies. We'll start by tracking the buyer of your house." Helen exhaled. "I never wanted it to come to this. She's still my daughter." "I understand," Naomi said softly, "but love doesn't erase the law." After the call, Helen sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. For the first time, she felt less like prey and more like a player in a larger game. Later, Rosa knocked again, bringing a plate of leftover empanadas. "You look better," she said, setting them down. "Maybe because I finally have a plan." "Good," Rosa replied. "Plans keep you breathing." As the night deepened, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Helen opened her notebook, the same one she'd used as a teacher, and began writing everything she remembered. Dates, names, every cruel word Melissa had said. She documented Derek's comments, the forged signature, even the motel's phone log. Years of grading essays had made her meticulous. She paused, staring at the words, "My daughter sold my house." For a moment, pain flickered again, raw, maternal, impossible to numb. She missed the girl who used to crawl into her lap after nightmares, who had once cried when Helen dropped her off at college. That daughter was gone, replaced by someone who measured love in profit margins. Helen closed the notebook gently. "You wanted a lesson in life, Melissa," she whispered. "Here it comes." Outside the motel, lights hummed against the drizzle. Across town, Derek Grant was about to discover that the woman he thought powerless had just become his worst nightmare. Helen woke early, long before sunrise, her mind already moving faster than her heartbeat. The motel's walls were thin. She could hear the muted argument of a couple next door, the clatter of a vending machine, the hiss of tires on wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn cried a sound that reminded her of nights spent waiting for Richard to come home from business trips. Now she was the one waiting not for him, but for justice. By 7, she sat in the motel lobby with a notebook open and a cup of weak coffee cooling beside her. She listed everything Naomi Torres had told her the night before: dates, account names, transaction details. Each line was proof she wasn't crazy. Derek and Melissa had lied. They had forged her signature, stolen her home, and buried the truth under fake concern. Rosa approached carrying a small potted plant. "You looked like you needed something alive in that room of yours," she said, setting it on the counter. Helen smiled faintly. "You keep doing this and I'll start believing the world still has good people. Don't mistake me for a saint," Rosa replied. "I just hate bullies." The motel door chimed as a delivery man entered, dropping off mail and a newspaper. The headline caught Helen's eye: "Real estate boom sparks legal scandals." She bought the paper, folded it under her arm, and returned to her room. At 9 sharp, her phone rang. "Mrs. Parker, Naomi said we've traced the buyer of your house. The transaction was processed through a shell company tied to one of Derek's business accounts. He never intended to sell to a stranger, he sold it to himself." Helen gripped the phone. "So it's fraud. Worse. He used your late husband's property as collateral for a private loan. If we prove that signature's forged, everything collapses on him." Helen sat in silence, her pulse quickening. "What about my daughter? She's listed as a co-signer. Whether she knew or not, she's legally responsible." The words hit like a hammer. For a long time, Helen said nothing. Then she whispered, "I just wanted to protect her, not destroy her." Naomi's tone softened. Sometimes the truth does both. That afternoon, Helen met Charles at his office again. He was pacing when she arrived, a thick folder in hand. "We got confirmation," he said. "The title company's documents don't match the official record. Derek forged everything down to the notary's stamp." Helen exhaled slowly. "So, it's real. Every suspicion." Charles nodded. "Naomi's coordinating with the district attorney. They'll move soon." "But you need to prepare yourself, Helen. This will be public. I've already lost everything that mattered," she said. "Let the truth come out." Charles hesitated. "There's one more thing. Richard's original will, did you ever see it? Only once years ago." He opened the folder. "This is the certified copy. It not only names you as sole heir, it also mentions a private account Richard set aside in case of family conflict. It's in your name, untouched." Helen blinked. "How much almost $2 million. Her breath caught. She pressed a hand to her mouth. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the faint spark of safety. "He knew this might happen," she murmured. Charles nodded. "He trusted you to be smarter than anyone who'd try to hurt you." When Helen returned to the motel, she found Rosa waiting with 2 cups of tea. "You look like someone who just got news worth celebrating," Rosa said. "Maybe I did." Helen handed her the newspaper, pointing to the headline. "That's my son-in-law's world, and it's about to crash." They sat together in silence for a while, sipping tea as the rain began again. Rosa finally asked, "You gonna tell your daughter what's coming?" "Not yet," Helen said. "She'll find out soon enough. People like Melissa only believe what they see in the mirror. I'll let her reflection do the work." That evening, Naomi called again. "We've set a formal interview for tomorrow. I'd like you present. We're gathering enough evidence to seize the assets before Derek can move them." Helen nodded, though Naomi couldn't see her. "I'll be ready." After hanging up, she opened her notebook and began another list, this time a plan. Step by step, she detailed how she'd rebuild once this was over. A small apartment, maybe volunteer work, a new life untouched by lies. Outside thunder cracked across the city. The neon motel sign buzzed, flickering against the dark sky. Helen stood by the window, the reflection of her face ghosted in the glass. "They think they've taken everything," she whispered, "but they've only given me purpose." Helen arrived at the downtown police building the next morning, escorted by Charles Rivers. The glass doors slid open with a hiss, and for a brief second she saw her reflection, pale, composed, and far stronger than she felt inside. Detective Naomi Torres greeted them near the elevators. Her gray suit was immaculate, her eyes sharp with quiet focus. "Mrs. Parker," she said, shaking Helen's hand. "Thank you for coming. We've made progress overnight." They followed Naomi into a small interview room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold glow over the table. Helen folded her hands to keep them from trembling. Naomi opened a file thick with documents. "Derek Grant transferred ownership of your property to a shell company registered under his assistant's name," Naomi explained. "He then used it as collateral for a private loan worth nearly $1.5 million. That money went into 3 separate accounts, 2 business, 1 personal." Helen's chest tightened. "He's gambling again, isn't he?" Naomi glanced at her. "You knew about his debts. He lost heavily 3 years ago," Helen said quietly. "Richard covered one of his loans before he died. I begged Melissa to see what kind of man he was, but she wouldn't listen." Charles spoke, next voice measured. "We can prove the forgery, Naomi. The handwriting, the fake notary, the fraudulent transfer, all of it." Naomi nodded. "And once the warrant is issued, we can freeze everything tied to him. But Helen, there's one thing you should know. Your daughter's name is on the joint account. Legally, she's complicit." Helen's throat burned. She didn't understand what she was signing. Maybe Naomi said, but ignorance won't protect her. The detective's tone wasn't cruel, just honest. Helen stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her fingertip. Love and anger tangled inside her until she couldn't tell one from the other. After the meeting, Charles walked her outside. The spring air was crisp, scented faintly with cherry blossoms from the park across the street. "You don't have to come to court," he told her gently. "We can handle it." "No," she said. "I need to see this through." That afternoon, Helen sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse while Charles filed the motion. Across the hall, she spotted Derek pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't seen her yet. His confidence had cracks now. The fast, nervous tapping of his fingers gave him away. She watched silently as 2 plainclothes officers approached him. Derek's smile faltered. They spoke briefly, then led him down the corridor. The sound of his voice, sharp protesting, echoed off the marble walls. For the first time in weeks, Helen allowed herself to breathe. When she returned to the motel, Rosa was waiting at the front desk with her usual grin. "You look like someone who just buried bad news instead of hearing it." "Something like that," Helen said, exhaling. "They caught him. He can't touch a cent." Rosa's eyebrows lifted. About time Karma paid him a visit. That night, Melissa called. Her voice shook. "Mom, what's happening?" "Derek says the police froze our accounts. They're saying something about fraud." Helen gripped the phone, trying to steady her breathing. "Maybe you should ask your husband." "He says it's all a misunderstanding," Melissa cried. "He was trying to help us." "You have to tell them you knew about the sale." "I did know after it was done," Helen replied coldly. "You signed those papers, Melissa." There was silence, then a broken sob. "I didn't read them. He said it was just refinancing." Helen closed her eyes. "You always believed what was easiest. Now you'll have to believe the truth." "Please, Mom," Melissa whispered. "Don't let them take everything." Helen's voice softened, but it carried steel. "You already did that, sweetheart." After hanging up, she sat by the window watching headlights glide across wet pavement. The anger that had fueled her for days drained away, leaving only exhaustion. Still beneath the fatigue, there was relief. The law was finally catching up. Later, Rosa knocked with a bowl of soup. "You all right? I will be," Helen said. "It's strange justice doesn't feel like victory. Just balance." Rosa smiled knowingly. "That's enough. Balance keeps the world from falling apart." Helen nodded. For the first time, she believed it. The next morning, Helen sat at the small table in her motel room, the phone pressed to her ear as Naomi Torres's calm voice filled the line. "Derek's been released on bail," the detective said. "We seized the accounts, but he's already calling investors and spinning the story. He's claiming it's all a clerical error." Helen stared at the chipped edge of her coffee mug. And Melissa. "She hasn't been charged yet," Naomi replied, "but she's named in several documents. Whether she knew or not, she signed her mother's life away." Helen closed her eyes. "She's my daughter. I don't want her destroyed." Naomi's tone softened. "Then let the evidence speak. Sometimes justice teaches the lesson love couldn't." After hanging up, Helen walked outside into the cool morning air. The city felt cleaner after the rain, but the motel parking lot was still littered with puddles that reflected the gray sky. Rosa was watering plants by the entrance, humming an old song in Spanish. "You look better," Rosa said, setting the watering can down. "Almost like you slept," a little Helen admitted. "The detective says it's only beginning." Rosa gave her a knowing look. "When the storm starts, don't hide from it. Stand in it until it's over." Helen smiled faintly. "You talk like you've done this before." "I have," Rosa said simply. "Different villains, same lesson." By mid-morning, Charles called asking her to meet him downtown. The courthouse corridors smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Charles was waiting with a sealed envelope. "This came from the bank this morning," he said. "It's the statement for Richard's private account." Helen opened it carefully. The numbers blurred for a second before her eyes adjusted. $2,100,000, untouched. Her knees nearly buckled. "He really did it," she whispered. "He protected me." Charles nodded. He must have known something like this could happen. He even wrote a letter to accompany it. He handed her a single folded page, yellowed around the edges. Helen read the familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the world turned crueler than I hoped. Don't let anyone decide your worth. Money is only power when you use it for the right reasons." Her throat tightened. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. "I'll use it," she said, "but not for revenge, for rebuilding." Charles smiled. That's exactly what he'd want. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed, shouting questions about the Grant property scandal. Helen lowered her head, moving quickly toward the parking lot. When one reporter asked Mrs. Parker, "Are you pressing charges against your own daughter?" she stopped. She turned her voice calm but cutting. "I'm pressing charges against anyone who forged my name. Blood doesn't excuse crime." Then she walked away. Back at the motel, Rosa was waiting with a fresh pot of tea and an amused grin. "You're on the news, Carita. I saw you on the lobby TV. You looked fierce." Helen laughed softly. "Fierce isn't what I was going for." "Doesn't matter," Rosa said. "People believe strength when they see it." That evening, Naomi stopped by in person, her coat damp from the drizzle. She spread new documents across the table. The judge granted full freeze orders. Derek can't move a cent. His investors are demanding answers. Helen studied the papers. What happens next? Naomi's gaze met hers. "We gather testimony. If you're willing, you'll be the key witness." Helen hesitated. "If I testify, Melissa will see me as her enemy." "She already made that choice," Naomi said gently. "This isn't about revenge. It's about ending the cycle." For a long moment, Helen stared at the rain streaking the window. She saw her reflection faintly in the glass, lined weary but still unbroken. "I'll testify," she said finally, "but afterward, I want to start something good with what's left. Like what Naomi asked, a foundation," Helen replied. "Something to help women like me, people who trusted the wrong family and lost everything." Naomi nodded, impressed. "That's the kind of justice that lasts." When the detective left, Helen poured herself tea and sat quietly. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel heavy. Somewhere outside, tires hissed on the wet road, and she thought of Richard again, his steady hands, his unshakable calm. "Don't let anyone decide your worth," he had written. She smiled to herself. "I won't." Helen's phone rang just after sunset. She hesitated before answering. She already knew who it was. Derek Grant's voice came through the line, smooth as oil and twice as slick. "Helen," he said, "we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding." She took a deep breath. "A misunderstanding. You forged my signature, stole my home, and tried to sell it under a shell company. Now let's not throw words like stole around," he replied lightly. "I made a few miscalculations, but nothing criminal. We can fix this privately." Helen's grip on the phone tightened. "You mean before the police finish what they've started?" Silence, then a laugh, low and strained. "You don't understand how business works. Those accounts are frozen now, but if you cooperate, I can release the funds. We all walk away clean." Helen smiled coldly. "You're offering me my own money." He sighed. "You're making this emotional. Melissa's distraught. Think about her." "I am," Helen said, "and I'm thinking she deserves better than a husband who treats everyone like a transaction." "You're angry," Derek said. "But anger fades. You don't want to ruin your daughter's life." Helen felt her heartbeat steady, her fear dissolving into focus. "You already did that for me." The next morning, she met Naomi at the precinct. The detective had been up all night reviewing financial records. "He called you?" Naomi asked. "Yes." He tried to bargain. "Good," Naomi said, opening a folder. "That means he's scared. When liars start negotiating, they're running out of lies." They reviewed the evidence together. Bank transfers, forged notary stamps, fake company names. Naomi's expression hardened. "He wasn't just greedy. He's been doing this for years. You were his biggest haul." Helen shook her head slowly. "He saw my trust as an open door." "Then we'll slam it shut," Naomi said. That afternoon, Naomi arranged for Helen to record her next conversation with Derek. "He'll call again," she said. "Pretend you're considering his offer. Let him talk." When the phone rang that evening, Helen pressed record. "Derek," she said calmly, "I've been thinking. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement. Now we're being reasonable, he said. Here's what I propose. You withdraw the complaint. I'll move the funds into a joint account, half for you, half for Melissa and me. We avoid scandal. Helen almost laughed. Half of what was mine, you're generous. Don't mock me, he snapped. I'm giving you a way out. You can't handle lawsuits, publicity, all that stress. You'd be surprised, Helen replied. He exhaled sharply. You always were stubborn. Fine. Be noble. But remember, when the bank forecloses and your daughter loses everything, it'll be on you. Funny, Helen said quietly. That's exactly what you told me the day you sold my house. There was silence, then the click of him ending the call. Naomi replayed the recording, later satisfied. It's enough, she said. Combined with the documents, we can issue a full warrant. That night, Helen returned to the motel. Rosa met her at the door holding 2 cups of tea. You look like someone who just punched a ghost, Rosa said. Maybe I did, Helen replied. He's finally trapped. Rosa smiled. Good. Some men need to meet karma face to face. Later, alone in her room, Helen sat by the window, the recorder still on the table. The rain whispered against the glass. She felt no joy, only release. For months, she had been a pawn in someone else's scheme. Now she was writing her own ending. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Melissa. Mom, please. Derek says they're coming for him. Can we talk before it's too late? Helen typed slowly. I'm not the one he should be talking to. Tell him to call his lawyer. The next morning, news broke that Derek had been taken into custody. The police found enough evidence to freeze every account he'd touched. His empire collapsed overnight. When Naomi called to confirm the arrest, Helen simply said, I don't feel triumphant. Naomi's voice softened. Justice rarely feels like triumph. It feels like truth. Helen looked out over the motel parking lot, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Then I can live with that, she said. In that quiet moment, she realized something profound. Revenge wasn't what she needed. What she'd wanted all along was acknowledgement, proof that her voice still mattered. Now she had it. Helen woke to a message from Naomi. Derek Grant is officially under federal investigation. Expect fallout. Fallout arrived faster than she imagined. By noon, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Helen watched from the motel's flickering television as Derek strutted into the building in a tailored navy suit, his smile polished for cameras. Melissa followed, pale and shaking her hand, trembling as she adjusted her sunglasses. Rosa knocked, carrying a tray of toast and coffee. Your daughter's on TV, she said softly. I know, Helen replied, her voice distant. She looks terrified. She should be. Rosa set the tray down. People like that only learn when the world stops pretending to like them. Hours later, Naomi called. The questioning's done, she said. Derek denied everything. Claims you signed willingly. He's blaming a clerical mix-up. Helen's jaw tightened. And Melissa. She cried halfway through. Said she trusted her husband, didn't read what she signed. Helen let out a long breath. She's been trusting the wrong men her whole life. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She sat at the window, watching the headlights slice through the rain. For the first time since it all began, anger faded into pity. Melissa wasn't evil, just lost, too desperate to belong to the wrong man. The phone rang close to midnight. Helen's chest clenched when she saw her daughter's name. She answered anyway. Mom, Melissa whispered voice, small, broken. I didn't know, I swear I didn't. Helen said nothing. He told me the sale was temporary. Melissa continued. Said putting the house in his name would help with taxes. And you believed him? Helen said quietly. I trusted him, Melissa cried. I thought he was protecting us. You signed my name without reading. That's not trust. That's blindness. I know, Melissa said through tears. Now they've frozen everything. He says you're doing this to punish us. Helen's heart twisted. "I didn't destroy your life, Melissa. You handed it to him." There was silence, then a whisper. "I don't have anywhere to go." Helen closed her eyes, remembering a much younger Melissa clutching her backpack on the first day of school. "Come here tomorrow," she said softly, "alone." The next morning, Melissa arrived at the motel looking smaller than Helen remembered. The designer clothes were gone. She wore an oversized sweater and carried nothing but her purse. Rosa, sensing the tension, excused herself. Melissa sat at the small table, twisting a tissue in her hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought I was helping us. He said you'd lose the house if we didn't act fast." "I didn't think that's the problem," Helen interrupted. "You never thought. You just believed the story that made you feel powerful." Melissa flinched. "He said you couldn't handle money anymore, that you'd mess everything up." Helen stared at her. "And that made sense to you. After everything I did for you, I raised you alone, paid for your college, and you believed a man who met you halfway through your own wedding." Tears filled Melissa's eyes. "He fooled me. He fooled everyone." Helen's tone softened. "Then help fix what he broke. You still have access to his emails, his computer, his phone. If you want redemption, bring me proof of what he did." Melissa hesitated. "He'll find out. Then he'll destroy you completely. This is your one chance to stand up for yourself." That night, the rain returned, drumming against the motel windows. Helen sat awake wondering if Melissa would come back. At 11, headlights swept across the parking lot. Moments later, a knock. Melissa stood there, hair wet, eyes red, holding a small flash drive. "Everything's here," she said. "Emails, contracts, accounts, everything." Helen took it gently. "You did the right thing." "I don't feel right," Melissa whispered. "I feel sick." "Doing the right thing usually starts that way," Helen said quietly. After Melissa left, Rosa appeared wiping her hands on a dish towel. Family fight over Helen shook her head. Family reckoning. She plugged the drive into her laptop. Folders appeared. Transactions, bank statements, and messages linking Derek to multiple fraudulent deals. Proof powerful enough to bury him. She called Naomi immediately. "I have what you need." Naomi's voice brightened. "You just ended this case." When the detective arrived an hour later, she scanned the files, eyes sharp with satisfaction. "This is it, the smoking gun." Helen leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. "He used my trust to build his empire. Now he can watch it collapse." As Naomi left, the rain stopped. The city outside was quiet, washed clean. Helen stood by the window, her reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in months, her chest loosened. "Justice doesn't heal everything," she murmured, "but it finally lets you breathe." The following morning, sunlight broke through Portland's usual gray slicing across the motel's faded curtains. Helen hadn't slept much. The flash drive Naomi had taken now sat in an FBI evidence locker, and Derek Grant's empire was unraveling by the hour. By 9, her phone buzzed. Naomi's voice was brisk. "We're moving in today. Warrants are signed. He'll be arrested before lunch." Helen sat at the edge of her bed, gripping the phone tighter. "And Melissa, she's cooperating," Naomi said. "What she brought us saved her from being charged as an accomplice. You may not believe it yet, but your daughter finally did the right thing." Helen's throat tightened. "Then maybe there's still a piece of her I recognize." When the call ended, Helen stayed still for a long moment. Then she rose, dressed carefully in her navy cardigan and gray slacks, the same outfit she'd worn to Melissa's graduation years ago, and drove downtown. She parked near the courthouse where reporters were already gathering. The city buzzed with scandal. Derek Grant, once the rising star of Portland real estate, was now headline material, fraud, forgery, and family betrayal. Helen stayed across the street unseen as agents led him out of his office in handcuffs. His confident posture was gone. His tie hung loose, his face pale with disbelief. For a fleeting second, she felt no triumph, only emptiness. Justice didn't taste sweet. It tasted like relief mixed with grief. She turned away before anyone could see her cry. At the motel, Rosa greeted her with wide eyes. "You see the news?" Helen nodded. "It's over." Rosa poured her coffee. "So what now?" Senora Helen looked out the window. "Now I start again." Later that afternoon, Naomi arrived with a folder of official documents. "The assets have been restored. The house, the investments, everything Derek took now belongs to you again." The court froze his accounts pending sentencing. Helen ran her fingertips across the embossed seal. "After everything, I thought I'd feel more alive." "That comes later," Naomi said gently. "Right now, you're still standing in the ruins, but they're yours to rebuild." She smiled faintly. "And you sound like my husband." Naomi closed the folder. "There's one more thing. Richard's trust, the private account Charles mentioned, was examined. Turns out it's linked to a series of offshore holdings. Your husband was helping the government uncover financial crimes years before he died. He left everything in your name as a safeguard." Helen blinked. "So all this time he was protecting us even after death?" "Exactly," Naomi said. "And now you can decide what that protection means." That night, Helen sat in her room surrounded by silence. The motel, once a place of humiliation, had become her refuge. She thought of Richard's last letter. "Money is only power when you use it for the right reasons." She reached for her notebook and began writing "The Parker Foundation for Women in Crisis," a place for women deceived by their own families, manipulated out of homes, inheritances, and dignity. A place for second chances. When Rosa stopped by with leftover soup, Helen shared the idea. "You want to start a foundation?" Rosa asked. "I do," Helen said. "There are too many women like me, women who believed love meant trust." Rosa smiled warmly. "If you're hiring, I know someone who makes excellent coffee and gives better advice." Helen laughed. "You just got promoted." As midnight neared, Helen scrolled through her phone and paused on an unread message from Melissa. "Mom, I heard about the arrest. I'm sorry, truly sorry." For a long moment, Helen didn't reply. Then she typed, "We both lost something, Melissa. But maybe we can start by learning what love without lies looks like." She pressed send and set the phone down. Outside, the city was quiet, washed clean by the rain. She opened the window and breathed in the cool night air. Somewhere downtown, Derek was behind bars and Melissa was beginning to face herself. Helen whispered into the dark, "It's finally over." But deep down, she knew it wasn't the end. It was the start of something new, something she would build not from anger but from strength. She looked at the faint outline of Mount Hood in the distance and felt Richard beside her, calm and steady as always. "I kept my promise," she murmured. "You told me never to let anyone decide my worth, and I didn't." The morning after Derek's arrest, Helen woke to sunlight streaming through the motel curtains. For the first time in months, she felt the quiet peace of safety. The television in the corner murmured about his downfall images of Derek being escorted from his office, handcuffed, his once perfect hair disheveled. Beneath the headline, "Real Estate Mogul," charged in multi-million-dollar fraud, the anchors debated how someone so successful could fall so far. Helen switched it off. She didn't need to hear strangers dissect her pain like a case study. She had lived it. Rosa knocked and entered carrying 2 mugs of coffee. So what does a free woman do on her first morning without thieves hanging over her? Helen smiled faintly. Breathe, then figure out what comes next. Rosa sat opposite her. You could buy a new house, start fresh. Maybe Helen said, stirring her coffee. But the house was never just walls. It was trust. It's gone now. Later that morning, Naomi called. Derek confessed partially, she said. He's trying to claim coercion, that investors pressured him, that Melissa was the real mastermind. He's desperate. Helen's jaw clenched. He's throwing her under the bus. Exactly, Naomi replied. Your daughter might be naive, but she's not guilty of the crimes he committed. The evidence clears her. Still, she'll have to testify. Helen looked out the window, the Oregon sunlight glinting off puddles. Will she go to prison? No, Naomi said, but she'll have to live with the public shame. That afternoon, Helen met Charles at a cafe downtown. The air smelled of roasted beans and fresh rain. Charles handed her a folder. These are the final court documents. Ownership of your house is officially reinstated. You can move back whenever you're ready. Helen traced the embossed stamp on the page. I thought I'd never see this again. Charles smiled softly. You earned it back. She looked up. You know it's strange. I wanted justice so badly, and now that I have it, I'm not sure what to do with it. That's the hardest part, Charles said. When the storm ends, silence feels foreign. As she left the cafe, Helen passed a newsstand. Derek's face stared back from every paper eyes, wild and defeated. She barely recognized the man who had once smiled at her dining table, calling her mom. That evening, she visited her old house for the first time since everything began. The lock was stiff, the air inside stale with disuse. She stepped through each room slowly, the kitchen, the study, the hallway where Melissa had taken her first steps. Dust floated through sunlight like memory itself. Her fingers brushed the piano, the one Richard used to play on quiet Sunday afternoons. She could almost hear him again, calm and steady, reminding her that strength wasn't about fighting harder, it was about standing taller. Helen wandered into the living room where boxes still stood from the day she'd been forced out. In one corner, she found a framed photo of Melissa as a child missing her 2 front teeth, grinning proudly with paint-smeared hands. Helen traced the glass with her thumb, whispering, "We'll find our way back." Outside, Naomi's car pulled up. The detective stepped out, smiling. "You're really here," she said. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Helen nodded. "I almost don't recognize it, but maybe that's a good thing." Naomi handed her another document. Derek pled guilty to multiple counts. He'll serve at least 15 years. Restitution is guaranteed. You'll recover every cent. Helen exhaled. Then it's truly over. Naomi smiled faintly. Almost. There's a press conference tomorrow. You'll be asked to make a statement. The department wants you to speak about elder financial abuse. It's become a national story. Helen hesitated. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can, Naomi said. People need to see what strength looks like at 68. After Naomi left, Helen stood on the porch watching the sunset blaze orange behind the trees Richard had planted. For years, she had lived in the shadow of others, her husband, her daughter, her son-in-law. Now, standing in the fading light, she felt a different kind of ownership. This house no longer symbolized loss. It was a reminder that survival could be quiet, dignified, and powerful. Rosa called later that night. So are you moving back for good? I think so, Helen said. But I'm not the same woman who left. Rosa chuckled. Good. The old one trusted too easily. Helen smiled. The new one knows when to fight. She looked around the house one last time before turning off the lights. Tomorrow she'd face cameras, reporters, and the world. But tonight she allowed herself peace, the kind born from truth, finally spoken. The next morning, Helen Parker dressed carefully, buttoning the navy blazer she hadn't worn since Richard's funeral. Outside, Portland glowed under soft spring sunlight, the air cool and steady. Today, she wasn't a victim anymore. She was the woman who had survived. Naomi had arranged a press conference at City Hall. Helen Parker, once a forgotten widow, was about to become the public voice for justice. City Hall's marble steps shimmered under the morning light. Reporters crowded near the podium, microphones clustered like metal flowers. Charles Rivers stood beside her, holding her notes. "You don't need to memorize," he said kindly. "Just tell them the truth." Helen glanced across the crowd and saw Rosa near the back waving with a proud smile. Naomi gave her a brief nod of reassurance. Helen stepped forward, the hum of cameras fading as she spoke. "I once believed that getting older meant becoming invisible," she began. "Then I learned invisibility isn't about age, it's about how easily people stop seeing you." The crowd quieted. "My daughter and son-in-law forged my name, sold my house, and told me it was for my own good. I trusted them because I thought love was enough to keep me safe, but love without respect isn't love. It's power disguised as care." Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. "I'm not here to talk about revenge. I'm here because thousands of people like me lose everything to people they trust most. It's called elder financial abuse, and it hides behind polite smiles, family dinners, and false concern. But it's theft, plain and simple. Cameras flashed, but no one spoke. I want every person listening to know this strength doesn't fade with age. It changes shape. You may grow slower, but your courage grows sharper, and it's never too late to fight back." Applause erupted, echoing against the marble walls. Reporters shouted questions, but Helen simply said, "What's next?" "Rebuilding," and helping others do the same. Later, she returned home with a bouquet of wild daisies someone had handed her. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and memory. On the kitchen counter lay a newspaper, "Widow turned survivor, speaks for justice." Naomi arrived in the afternoon, her coat damp from rain. "You were incredible," she said. "You made half my department tear up." "I wasn't incredible," Helen replied softly. "I was just tired of being silent." Naomi set a thin folder on the counter. The FBI finished reviewing Richard's old business records. Everything was clean. Turns out he helped them years ago, exposing a tax evasion ring. The funds you inherited came from a government cooperation program. He put them under your name to protect you. Helen blinked, breath-catching. He was helping them all along. Naomi nodded. "He left it that way so no one could ever take it from you." Tears blurred Helen's vision. "He saved me even after he was gone." Naomi smiled. "Seems justice runs in your family." After she left, Helen walked into Richard's study. Afternoon light slanted across the desk where his pen still rested. She touched the framed photo of them on the Oregon coast, his arm around her, both laughing into the wind. "I did it, Rich," she whispered. "We're free." Her phone buzzed a message from Melissa. "Mom, I saw your speech. You were brave. I'm proud of you." Helen read it twice, unsure what to feel. Then she typed, "Thank you. Healing takes time, but I hope someday we'll get there." Setting the phone aside, she stepped onto the porch. The sun had broken through the clouds, lighting the wet leaves Richard once raked each fall. The air smelled of earth and forgiveness. Rosa arrived carrying groceries. "You're famous," she teased. "People at the motel keep asking for your autograph." Helen laughed. "Does fame come with quiet?" Never Rosa said. "But it does come with responsibility. So when does the foundation start?" Helen smiled. "Monday. We'll open the Parker Foundation for Women in Crisis, legal aid, housing support, financial counseling. I already have volunteers." Rosa unpacked the bags. "And who's running it? I was hoping you'd say yes." Rosa grinned. "You couldn't keep me away." That evening, they cooked together, the scent of onions and garlic filling the kitchen. Laughter replaced the silence that had once haunted these walls. When Rosa left, Helen stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer. She wasn't the same woman who had been driven from this home. She was someone rebuilt from truth, forged by betrayal and strengthened by grace. Richard had left her wealth, but she had found something rarer: freedom. 2 weeks later, the Parker Foundation for Women in Crisis opened quietly inside a renovated corner building downtown. Helen stood in the lobby that morning, sunlight spilling through the glass doors onto polished floors. The brass plaque by the entrance gleamed, founded by Helen Parker, dedicated to protecting those who trusted too much. Rosa was already arranging flowers on the reception desk. "Can you believe this used to be a pawn shop?" she said, grinning. "Now look at it. Hope instead of debt." Helen smiled. "That's what we're building here." Hope. Volunteers bustled through the hall carrying files and coffee. A soft hum of energy filled the air, new beginnings fragile but real. Charles stopped by with a folder of final legal approvals. "You did it, Helen," he said warmly. "You turned pain into purpose." Helen looked around, absorbing the sounds of laughter and conversation. "It doesn't erase what happened," she said, "but maybe it will stop it from happening to someone else." That afternoon, Naomi visited to congratulate her. She wore her usual gray suit, her expression softer than Helen had ever seen it. "The press is calling you a hero," Naomi said. Helen shook her head. "Heroes don't cry in motel rooms." "Maybe not," Naomi replied, "but survivors do, and they get up afterward." Naomi handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from the city council recognizing the foundation's contribution to community advocacy. Helen smiled wryly. "Official proof I'm old enough to be useful again." Naomi laughed. "Your proof strength doesn't retire." When Naomi left, Helen walked into her new office, a simple room with white walls and an oak desk. On the shelf sat Richard's watch and a framed photo of them on their wedding day. She whispered, "We made something good, didn't we?" By evening, the first clients began to arrive, women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, each carrying quiet pain. Rosa guided them gently through the forms, while Helen offered tea and patient smiles. One woman trembled as she explained how her son had emptied her savings. Helen clasped her hands and said softly, "You're not alone anymore." After the last visitor left, Helen sat by the window overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered across the water like scattered diamonds. For the first time since Richard's death, she felt contentment instead of grief. The next morning brought unexpected news. Melissa called. "Mom," she began carefully, "I've been volunteering at a shelter, helping with families in debt. I wanted you to know." Helen listened quietly. "That's good, Melissa. I'm proud of you. I'm still not sure you can forgive me." "Forgiveness isn't a switch," Helen said. "It's a door. It opens slowly." Melissa hesitated. "Can I see you soon?" Helen said. "Let's both heal a little more first." After the call, Helen poured herself coffee and watched the river flow beyond the window. Rosa appeared carrying a clipboard. "Busy day ahead," she said cheerfully. "The phones haven't stopped ringing." "Good," Helen replied. "That means we're needed." At noon, a journalist arrived to film a short segment about the foundation. Helen stood under the soft lights answering questions about the mission. "We're not just fighting fraud," she explained. "We're rebuilding trust in ourselves and each other. Betrayal teaches fear. We're here to teach strength." After the interview, Rosa teased her. "You look so calm, like you've been on TV for years." Helen laughed. "I was a teacher for 4 decades. Controlling chaos is my specialty." That evening, Charles dropped by with paperwork. "Derek's sentencing is scheduled for next month," he said. "He'll serve 15 years. Melissa's been cleared completely." Helen exhaled, feeling the final weight lift. "Then it's truly over." "Yes," Charles said. "You can live again." After he left, Helen stayed alone in the quiet office. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. She reached for her notebook and wrote, "Forgiveness begins when justice no longer needs to speak." She thought about Melissa, her daughter's tearful confession, the broken trust, the small steps toward redemption. Maybe this was how healing worked, not with grand gestures, but with ordinary days that didn't hurt anymore. Rosa peeked in before heading home. "Lock up when you're done, boss." Helen smiled. "Good night, Rosa. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me," Rosa said. "You saved yourself." "I just watched it happen." When the lights dimmed and the door clicked shut, Helen lingered for a moment, letting the stillness settle. Through the window, the city shimmered under the rain. "Here's to second chances," she whispered, turning off the lamp. 3 months later, the Parker Foundation was thriving. What began as one small office had grown into a network of volunteers, attorneys, and financial counselors. Every morning, Helen arrived early, unlocking the glass doors, to the smell of coffee and fresh paper. The walls were lined with framed letters, thank yous, from women whose lives had been rebuilt because someone finally listened. One morning, as she sorted mail, Rosa burst through the door holding a manila envelope. "Big news," she said breathlessly. "They approved our state grant." "You're officially funded for the next 3 years?" Helen blinked in surprise. 3 years? Rosa grinned. "You'll have to put up with me for a while." They laughed, but the sound carried warmth instead of exhaustion. For months, this building had echoed with resilience. It was no longer just a workplace, it was a second home. At noon, Naomi stopped by in plain clothes, her badge clipped to her belt. "Thought I'd see how my favorite troublemaker is doing," she said, smiling. Helen hugged her. "Keeping busy." "You drowning in paperwork?" Naomi sighed. "But I thought you should know Derek's sentencing is final. 15 years, no parole for at least 10. The judge called it a betrayal of both law and love. He tried to blame you until the end." Helen nodded slowly. "He'll have a lot of time to think." Naomi hesitated. "Melissa plans to visit him in prison next week. She says she needs closure." "Closure?" Helen repeated softly. "That's what we all need." That evening, Helen sat at her kitchen table, the house silent, except for the ticking clock. Her phone buzzed a message from Melissa. "Can we meet tomorrow?" "There's something I need to tell you." Helen typed back, "Yes, come at 10. The next morning, the doorbell rang right on time. Melissa stood on the porch holding a bouquet of lilies. She looked healthier, calmer. The sharp edges in her face had softened. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "Come in," Helen replied. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table where everything had once fallen apart. The silence between them was long but not hostile, just careful. "I've been going to counseling," Melissa began. "They call it recovery for financial trauma. I didn't even know that existed." Helen folded her hands. "It's a start." "I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness," Melissa continued. "I came to take responsibility. I let someone convince me you were weak. I see now that you were the strongest person I ever knew." Helen's eyes shimmered. "I wasn't strong, Melissa. I was scared. But fear doesn't excuse silence." We both learned that the hard way. Melissa took a shaky breath. "I'm volunteering at your foundation under a different name at the intake desk. I wanted to help without expecting credit." Helen looked at her surprised. "You've been here this whole time for the past month," Melissa said. "Rosa figured it out last week but didn't tell you. She said you needed to see it for yourself." For the first time in years, Helen laughed softly through her tears. "That woman knows everything." Melissa reached across the table and took her hand. "I can't undo what I did, but I can learn from it. And I want to earn my place back in your life slowly, if that's okay." Helen squeezed her hand gently. "It's more than okay, but I won't protect you from the truth anymore. We face it together or not at all." "Together," Melissa whispered. They sat in silence. both women understanding that forgiveness wasn't a single act, it was a daily choice. That afternoon, Rosa joined them at the foundation for lunch. When she saw Melissa, she winked. Ah, the secret volunteer finally revealed. Melissa blushed. You kept your promise. Rosa chuckled. I'm good at secrets. They ate sandwiches in the sunlit lobby surrounded by the quiet murmur of phones and laughter. Naomi stopped by, briefly teasing. Look at you three, justice, redemption, and coffee. Later, as the day wound down, Helen walked to the river that ran behind the building. The air was warm, the sky streaked gold and lavender. She could hear faint music from a nearby cafe, and it felt like the city itself was breathing again. Melissa joined her, slipping her arm through her mother's. You know, she said I used to think wealth meant power. Now I see it's peace. Helen smiled. Peace is the only thing worth earning. They stood there as the river moved steadily toward the sea, past pain and possibility, all flowing in the same direction. For the first time since the nightmare began, Helen felt whole. 6 months later, the Parker Foundation was no longer a single office tucked in a corner of Portland. It occupied an entire floor of a downtown building, its glass walls glowing with new life. Each morning, Helen arrived early, unlocking the doors before the city fully woke. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet purpose. Volunteers answering phones, attorneys reviewing cases, counselors comforting the newly betrayed. The world had started calling her the woman who turned pain into progress, but Helen only thought of herself as someone who had survived long enough to help others do the same. Rosa met her in the lobby carrying 2 cups of coffee. You skipped breakfast again, she said. I'm running on gratitude, Helen replied, smiling. Gratitude won't keep you standing, Rosa teased. Eat something before you faint and make me famous for the wrong reason. Helen laughed, then walked to the large bulletin board in the hallway. It was filled with photographs, women and men who had reclaimed their homes, their savings, their dignity. Each picture told a story, but one in particular stopped her a widow standing in front of a small white cottage, smiling through tears. Helen touched the photo gently. That's why we do this, she whispered. At 10, Naomi arrived still in her sharp gray suit, her tone brisk but affectionate. The governor's office called, she said. They want you to speak at the state summit on elder protection next month. Helen blinked. A summit? I'm no politician. Naomi chuckled. You're better than a politician. You tell the truth. Later, they gathered in the conference room for their weekly meeting. Melissa stood at the front, hair neatly tied back, her voice steady as she presented new data on outreach programs. Watching her daughter command the room filled Helen with quiet awe. This was the same woman who had once cried on her doorstep, broken and ashamed. Now she was strong, competent, alive again. After the meeting, Melissa lingered. They offered me a permanent position, she said shyly, regional coordinator for the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to ask if you're okay with it. Helen smiled. I'm not just okay, I'm proud. Melissa's eyes shimmered. After everything, I didn't think I deserved that word from you. Helen reached across the desk. Redemption doesn't erase the past, honey, it builds from it. That afternoon, Naomi pulled Helen aside. You should know, she said, lowering her voice, the department's starting a new unit for family financial crimes. It's being modeled after your case. You inspired it. Helen blinked, overwhelmed. I never meant to inspire anyone. Naomi smiled. That's exactly why you did. That evening, Helen hosted a small celebration in the office lounge. The staff brought cupcakes and homemade lasagna, laughter bouncing off the walls. Rosa raised a glass. To our boss who turned betrayal into a business plan for kindness. The room burst into cheers. Melissa clinked her glass against Helen's and said softly, to my mother, the woman who taught me that forgiveness isn't surrender. It's freedom. Helen's throat tightened as applause filled the room. She looked around at the faces glowing under the soft light, people who had once been strangers, now bound by hope. For years, she had thought of herself as broken beyond repair. But here she was, whole again. Later, after everyone left, Rosa stayed to tidy up while Helen stood by the window. Outside, the city shimmered under a clear night sky. 6 years ago, Helen said quietly, "I thought my life ended the day they threw me out of my house." Rosa smiled. "Turns out that was just chapter 1 of your comeback story." Helen laughed softly. "Maybe betrayal isn't the end. It's the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be." The next morning, she drove back to her old neighborhood. Her former home was now painted pale blue, children's toys scattered across the yard. A young couple waved from the porch. Helen waved back, smiling. She felt no sting, no grief, only gratitude. Life had moved on, and so had she. Later, she walked along the Willamette River, carrying a small wooden box filled with letters Richard had written her decades ago. She opened the last one and read his words, "If life tests you, remember you are not fragile. You are fire waiting for air." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were warm, not bitter. She placed the letter on the water, watching it drift away until it vanished under sunlight. Her phone buzzed. A message from Melissa Lunch at 2, "My treat this time." Helen smiled. "Only if I get to leave the tip." As she drove back downtown, the city gleamed ahead like a promise. She no longer measured her worth by what she had lost, but by everything she had learned to rebuild. For the first time in her 70 years, Helen Parker finally felt free. The morning of the summit arrived bright and clear. From her hotel window overlooking Salem's Capitol dome, Helen Parker could see people gathering outside the convention hall, advocates, journalists, and officials. The event banner stretched across the entrance read, "Elder Protection Summit Turning Experience into Action." Her name was listed last beneath the keynote speakers, but somehow it was the one people whispered about. Rosa knocked on the door holding 2 cups of coffee. "You ready to change the world again?" Helen smiled. "Maybe just remind it we're still here." Rosa adjusted Helen's scarf. "You look powerful, like a senator with better morals." By 10, the hall was full. Helen sat backstage beside Naomi and Melissa, listening as other speakers addressed policy and prevention. When her turn came, the moderator introduced her simply, a survivor, who became an advocate. Helen stepped onto the stage. Applause rippled softly through the room. She waited for it to fade, then spoke into the quiet. "I once believed that growing older meant losing control of my home, my choices, my voice. Then I learned that silence only gives power to those who misuse trust. My story isn't unique. I was betrayed by my own family, but what destroyed me wasn't the loss. It was the disbelief that followed." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We call it elder financial abuse, but what it really is theft of dignity. It happens quietly behind smiles and paperwork. The solution isn't just better laws, it's teaching people that worth doesn't expire with age. The audience rose in applause. Helen caught sight of Melissa near the front row, tears in her eyes, pride shining through them. After the session, reporters surrounded her. One asked Mrs. Parker, "After everything you've endured, do you forgive your daughter?" Helen smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't a favor. It's freedom for both of us. And yes, I do. Because healing needs space to grow." Another reporter leaned forward. "What would you say to others going through what you did? I'd tell them this," Helen said firmly. "You are not invisible. You are not too late. You are not done." Later that afternoon, the governor herself approached to thank Helen personally. Cameras flashed as they shook hands. "You've done more for awareness in 1 year than our department managed in 10, the governor said. Helen laughed softly. "I'm just a teacher who refused to stay quiet." When the summit ended, Helen, Rosa, and Melissa walked together through the city park nearby. The trees were just starting to bloom. Naomi joined them carrying ice cream cones. "You were amazing," she said. Every person in that hall was listening. Helen smiled. Then maybe this pain finally meant something. They sat by the fountain watching sunlight sparkle on the water. Melissa leaned her head on Helen's shoulder. "You know, Mom, I used to think the story of us ended with that house. Now I see it was just the beginning." Helen wrapped an arm around her. "We can't choose how a story starts, but we can decide how it ends." That evening, they drove back to Portland. The city lights shimmered like constellations reflected on wet pavement. When they reached home, Helen unlocked the front door and paused, taking in the scent of roses drifting from the garden. For years, this house had been a place of pain. Now it was filled with laughter and the clatter of dinner plates. Inside, Rosa set the table while Melissa poured wine. Naomi joined them, raising her glass. "To Helen Parker," she said, "a reminder that justice isn't revenge, it's repair." Helen lifted her glass. "And to every woman who's ever been told she's too old, too tired, or too late. We are just getting started." They toasted their laughter, mingling with the music playing softly in the background. After dinner, Helen stepped outside onto the porch. The night air carried a gentle chill. She could hear the hum of the city and smell the rain beginning to fall. Above her, the sky stretched wide and open. She thought of Richard, his voice, his letters, his faith in her strength. "We did it, Rich," she whispered. "They tried to take everything, but I found more than I lost." From the living room, Rosa called, "You coming back in, boss?" "In a minute," Helen replied. She looked once more at the glowing windows behind her, the home she had rebuilt, the family she had redefined, the life she had reclaimed. Then she smiled and whispered, "The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be." And somewhere deep inside, Helen Parker finally felt at peace.